now open this discussion for more questions, and I mean, if anybody wants to ask, they can raise their hands on the system, in the chat window. Then I will ask you. And I think Mike has a question. I think I can see his hand. Mike, go ahead. Switch on your microphone, Mike.
Is it?
Yeah. Okay.
Can you speak with?
Yeah. Go ahead. We can hear you now.
Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm in tune, 100% tune with Dr. Kuru. In my book, I have written the source of extremism in Islam are Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Kathir, Maududi. These are the guys who brought political Islam. The question directly I have for Dr. Kuru, I don't believe there was ever an Islamic government. When Prophet Muhammad initiated the Medina Treaty, it was to protect the Jews, Christians, and others from being overwhelmed by the majority Muslims. And he ruled by their own laws. If Jews were ruled by their own laws, Christians were ruled by their own laws, and the other people were run by their own laws. So how can we claim that Muhammad had an Islamic government? I think it was a pluralistic government, like Indonesia and India have pluralistic form of governments, where each community is run by their own rules and guidances. So my question is, was there ever an Islamic government?
Thank you. This is an important question, and you're right that when the Prophet came to Medina, he had this covenant with Muslim Jews, even pagans, and there were certain level of coexistence, and he continues friendship with some Jews and others until his death. And one important issue here is to emphasize that, yes, on the one hand, yes, the Prophet led armies and he had a public treasury and therefore used the military and budgetary aspect of governance. But no, because he did not have an institutionalized state to rule, neither the four caliphs. In Islamic history, the first ruler who used bodyguards was Muawiyah, the founder of Umayyad dynasty. The first person who used a throne and a crown and other symbols of monarchy is again Muawiyah. Until Muawiyah, the Prophet himself, then the following four caliphs were humble leaders, one of the community members, no palace, no protocol, no symbols of state as an institution. You know the story about the Hariji, the radicals of the time. They sent assassins to kill Muawiyah and Ali. The bodyguards of Muawiyah captured the assassin. Then he said Ali should have been already that assassin because he didn't have bodyguards. So the Prophet and the four caliphs were exceptional leaders with more charismatic leaders, their personality. They were not state builders. Modern state, even the medieval state as an entity, is a different thing. It has its own raison d'etat, its own logic. And the Umayyads accepted raison d'etat. Therefore, they were mostly secular leaders. And with this kind of state, good Muslims, Muslim scholars definitely put an intellectual and financial distance in order to protect their morality. Otherwise, this state would corrupt your lifestyle, etc. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Yeah. And anybody else would like to ask a question? I think the mics, they can just have to switch on the mics and ask.
Hi.
Yeah, may I ask a question?
Yes, who's this? Can you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm
Swasti. Yes, Swasti, yes. Go ahead.
Well, I think from the discussion that you had with Professor Ahmet Kuru, I think one big question I had in mind was already answered. But the other, and I'm going to ask a very simple question, which is that what do you think, or could you explain me a little bit about any religious reformations, taking place within Islam? Because as you said that until the 11th century, things were different because there was a kind of a state and religion separation because of a booming merchant class, and most of the ulemas or the religious scholars were basically not under any state, so to say, patronage, and that was where the dynamism came from. And after 11th century, things changed because of crusades, etc., etc. So after that until now, have there been any reforms to sort of bring back the dynamism within the Muslim world or within the Muslim intellectual world, is my question.
Question. There has always been. So, as you know, Michel Foucault says, power and resistance always coexistent. Wherever there is power, there's always a level of resistance. Even between a parent and a child, there's always authority and resistance. And reform, dogmatism, they coexist always in different layers, different levels. Even before mid-11th century, for example, there were pockets of or existence of dogmatism and resistance. Ibn Rushd in his life, he first received the support of the ruler, but then the ruler changed. The next ruler was influenced by some conservatives, therefore he put the Ibn Rushd in exile. So it's a very dynamic process. I'm trying to summarize a very overall trend. Definitely there are details, many reforms, etc. So especially in the 19th century, in the subcontinent, Sayyid Ahmed Khan, Aligarh University, then more Islamist attempts, some secularist attempts in Egypt, in Turkey, many reformists. But by and large, reformism doesn't seem to be very successful. Why? One explanation is that reformists generally are unable to provide us theologically, theoretically, philosophically deep and consistent books and publications. There are, but not very striking and powerful. Even Fazlur Rahman, a major Pakistani and later American scholar, when he was asked who really wrote the book about Islamic reform, because Fazlur Rahman himself had important books, Islam and modernity, major themes in the Quran, but not a single volume you can pinpoint, this is the book. Not a magnum opus. And he said, the one who wrote the book is Iqbal, Muhammad Iqbal, but he is a poet. And then I read Iqbal's book. It's a good book, but from the German philosophy, he tried to present an understanding of Islam. So someone should mute, right? Okay.
Yeah, so mic is on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Iqbal's book is an eclectic book with German philosophy and some Muslim ideas, try to show that Islam should be a dynamic religion, a dynamic understanding. Anyhow, this example that Fazlur Rahman referred to Iqbal, and Iqbal's book is more poetic and German philosophy, show that we are still in search for theoretically deep and consistent. And one book, one person can't do, definitely. There should be series of them. Many. It's a teamwork. There should be thousands of contributions in order to say. That's one thing. Second thing is that many reformists, at least in the last 2 centuries, they become part of top-down authoritarian regimes. In Turkey, for example, Kemalism, the legacy of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, many reformists became part of it, but it presented to be an authoritarian top-down state-based modernization project. They made mistakes like headscarf ban. Why are you banning headscarf when 65% of women in Turkey are wearing it? It's exclusionary to women. And again, they are generally anti-bourgeois, anti-intellectual. That's the second problem of reformists. The third problem is not their own mistake. That's how the conservatives attack them. In Turkey, even today, even in the broader Muslim world, ulama, the Islamists and the Sufi sheikhs, blame the reformists as being infidel apostate, as the verse. If they don't blame you as infidel apostate, they blame you to be an Orientalist, because that's something I receive almost every week. They say, oh, you are in America, you are brainwashed with American ideas, so you are too much under Orientalistic arguments, influence, etc. If you can surpass the test, you show that you are not an Orientalist, you are not brainwashed, you are not a CIA agent. They say, oh, do you know Arabic? You say, yes, I know Arabic. I studied Arabic 20 years. Then next level, they say, do you have irfan in your heart? Irfan, ilham, you know, do you have the spiritual superior position? But how can you prove that? How can I prove that I have irfan? And who is able to prove that? That your heart receiving some revelation from God, right? Even if you prove that you have irfan, they say how many hadiths you memorize? Should be 200,000. So every time they put a new barrier, that's the level of attack. But unfortunately, the masses believe in that. The Muslim masses, so the negativity, negative propaganda. And this is not a new thing. The negative propaganda started very early. In the 11th century, they said that Ibn Sina was a homosexual. Well, Ibn Sina was a drunk person. All the philosophers are immoral. And these are unfortunately a baseless accusation. Ibn Sina was not a homosexual. And so you may say, who cares? But at that time, people care about it. Very negative propaganda and lie. It's a lie. And how can they justify telling lies about philosophers? Farabi was a very decent man. He was wearing the wool and then gardener, busy with his books and flowers. He even refused to attend public dinners, invitation, etc. A very modest Sufi type life. But what is the propaganda? The philosophers are immoral, they don't have ethics, etc. So this is the third problem. So one is the lack of sufficient works. The second, the connection with authoritarian leaders. The third one, enormous level of propaganda with anyone, any critical ideas. That's the reason why I see the reform attempts exist, but not very influential.
Interesting. Absolutely fascinating, the input that you gave, Ahmed.
Thank you.
So I'm sure there will be other
Hello.
questions. Yes.
Could I ask a question? Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you please identify yourself?
Yes, my name is Sertaç Yener. I'm calling from Abu Dhabi. Thank you, Dr. Kuru. So regarding the connection between authoritarianism, absence of democracy, and the rentier economy. So given the declines in oil prices and the transformation in the energy markets, renewable energy, etc., do you think these are omens that point to the direction of declining authoritarianism, rise of democracy, simply because the commodity prices are on the fall? Can we say that as a long-term, let's say, wish? And if we are on that course, at what point are we going to see some sort of milestones or markers that would tell us that, yes, we are pretty much on that path to some better days? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very important question. So, in social science, we have the basic dilemma or question, the relationship between agency and structure. That's the main debate between Hegel and Marx too. We have to look at both. And in the mid-11th century, both structure and agency was ready. They complement each other for the change, for the establishment of ulama state orthodoxy. If we want to see a new change and more democratization, a major structure problem is oil rentierism, as you referred to. Oil age will end for all of us, not for Muslims, but for all of us, before the end of oil, because the Stone Age ended before the end of stones. We still have stones, right? This is a joke. So oil will maybe replaced with a new technology, maybe depleted. Domestic consumption in Saudi Arabia etc. is increasing, which makes less likely to make the welfare expenses by the oil money. So in the future, for Saudi Arabia, Iran and others, the future is not very promising in terms of using. That's a structural factor, and this gives us hope. But we also need agency that Muslims should contribute by their intellectual, economic, and other social political activities. If we don't do that, even if structure change, it will not automatically bring us democratization and goodness. And the last thing I want to say about this important topic is that every action creates a reaction. Islamization or political Islam was a reaction to the failure of secular regimes. Because in 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, Turkish Kemalist Baas regime in Iraq, Syria, Nasser's regime in Egypt, Habib Bourguiba in Tunisia, and Muslim secular leaders in other parts of the world came with many promises, but they mostly failed to fulfill their promises. It gives a chance to Islamists to use it, and secular action brings Islamist reaction. Today, we are seeing the failure of Islamism everywhere, in Turkey, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, on many grounds, economically, internationally, morally. And this is very important. Young generation now look at Islamists and say, Islam does not produce ethics, public ethics. Islamists are corrupt. Where is the religious morality? And therefore, young people are now becoming more critical of religion. And I am seeing some survey data showing that the young people becoming more secular, less religious in Turkey. And it's not surprising to see it in Iran. After so much mullah pressure, young people becoming more and more secular. And my hope is that this reaction to Islamism will be moderated. In my first book, I say religious-friendly, passive, moderate secularism. If the young generation came too much reactionary and hostile to religion in a very anti-Islamic way, we will never end this vicious circle in Turkey or elsewhere between extreme of secularism, extreme of Islamism. We should find a middle ground, but I'm definitely expecting a secularist backlash to this Islamist domination in many Muslim countries, and hoping that this secularist backlash will have boundaries and be moderate rather than too much extreme secularism. Thank you.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Yes, Dr. Sadek.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Dr. Ahmed, actually, in terms of the literacy between the Islamic countries and the rest of the world, there is not much difference. It is about 73% and 84% as per your statistics. But say in countries like India, we are very much lagging behind in education. What is your take on this? Means, of course, there had been neglect on education like the days of the Andalusians or something, but certainly we are not that much lagging behind over the across the world. So what is your specific take on this?
Dr. Sadek, there's a lot of background noise from your side. I think you need to ask those children to perhaps play a little outside.
So, very briefly, the schooling rate, 5.8 years per person in the Muslim world, 7.5 years in the world average. And then the literacy, 73 versus 80 or so, is still big because the world average includes Muslims themselves, which make the average declining. And there are some sub-Saharan African countries, some Asian countries with very low literacy and schooling. I did not want to compare Muslim world with Western Europe, because if you do so, the gap is much bigger. But even we add Muslims to world average, sub-Saharan and some Asian countries, still world average is higher, which is surprising and shocking. What explain? There is historical trajectory. I explained that historically there's a problem, but we can change it because South Korea 50 years ago was an underdeveloped country. And now they are competing with European countries. Change is possible. But in order to do that, we have to focus on education. Muslims in India or Turks in Turkey, we have to prioritize education. Unfortunately, in Turkey right now, the focus is lost. The AKP government, for example, has a determination to expand the number and efficiency of the Imam Hatip schools. Imam Hatip schools in Turkey are public Islamic schools, secondary and high school. And when the secularists attacked these schools 10 to 15 years ago, I am one of the main defender of them in academia. I wrote in my first book and my articles that graduates of this school should not be discriminated. The state secularists should not attack these schools. So the voice is still coming, right? Someone should mute.
Dr. Sadak, it's coming from your side.
Okay. So right now, AKP managed to increase the school's percentage to 14%. So 14% of all Turkish students are attending the schools which are supposed to train preachers and imams. So this shows how the focus is not education as making our next generation ready to compete worldwide, economically and intellectually in the future. But the focus is to spread an ideology, create new voters who are automatically vote for Erdogan. This is the plan. And Erdogan calls it his plan of pious generation. But the pious generation, basically an AKP generation. So this is just one example. So we as Muslims, as a minority or majority, should really invest our time and money and resources to education. And this is the way. But let me conclude with the recommendation in my book. Rather than following ulama and the state, we have to follow economic and intellectual entrepreneurs. We have to have a civilian, bottom-up initiative. Let me give you the example of printing press. In Western Europe, Gutenberg, as a German entrepreneur, when he opened the first printing press, he got private loan. As a private entrepreneur, he initiated the whole revolution. Whereas in the Muslim world, the first printing press in the Ottoman Empire, Ibrahim Müteferrika opened it. It's a very noble thing. I like him. I appreciate him. But he was a Hungarian convert who know Europe. Therefore, he was shocked that Muslim didn't have a printing press. Then he approached the prime minister, the Grand Vizier, and he himself was a diplomat. As a state enterprise, they opened the first printing press. And it took about a century to really see private entrepreneurs. So we are expecting everything from the state authority, top down, centralized. And this really killed the creativity. And even on the issue of education, yes, public education important. But here in this country, United States, even public education is very much community-based thing rather than centrally organized. And neighborhood and community level people participate. So therefore, Muslims should acknowledge that they have a historical gap to fill, and following the ulama and the state is not the solution. They need private economic and intellectual leaders to really initiate an education reform.
True.
Hello. May I ask a question?
Yes.
May I ask a question? Can I hear
Yeah,
you?
please, please introduce yourself first.
My name is Tio Shanavas. I'm calling from Washington, D.C., originally from Kerala, India. A comment about the previous question by the Indian gentleman about the education. They don't need to go anywhere else. Look at state of Kerala. Kerala Muslims are 100% literacy, and their standard of living is much better than anywhere in India. So education, education, education. Second, my question to Dr. Kuru is, the Quran very clear about there is no compulsion in religion, and also telling Prophet, whoever believe, let them believe, and no compulsion. How can the government is enforcement? How can you have a Islamic government, so-called Islamic government, without violating these Quranic verses?
Thank you. The major problem is that many Muslims, at least some Muslims, don't want to be consistent. They like these inconsistencies. They like to say that in the Quran, God asks us to contemplate or use or reason, but at the same time, they like to say Islam is submission, don't think too much. So they like to say that Islam is the religion of peace, but at the same time, when they see the Imam in Istanbul, Hagia Sophia Mosque, come to the khutbah with sword, they like it. Oh, sword is good. But they don't see the inconsistencies. How can you do both? And similarly, as you say, they like to see, yes, la ikraha fid din, there is no compulsion in religion. But at the same time, they like to see, oh, if you are saying something nasty about our religion, we are going to punish you. I think we have a major problem of inconsistencies. And in the cases I explain in my book, if you ask Muslims, where are your scholars? They say, oh, we produce major scholars, Ibn Sina, Farabi, Biruni. But then when you ask about them, many say, oh, these philosophers, apostates, they are not good Muslims. But 5 minutes ago, you present them as your hero. Now you say they all go to hell and you don't like them. So this is a major inconsistency. We really need to change our understanding of religion. Things should be consistent. We cannot repeat totally opposite things at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
one question. I do
I
have
think
a question.
Yeah.
I'm Mushatik here.
Yeah, Musaddiq bhai, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very practical, not theory and things. See, many people are from US. What we have seen is people going out of India to go to elsewhere, particularly in US and other things. You have to get connected with the local masjid, and it is controlled by the ulama. There is no other social establishment for the Muslims to interact. So how do you look at it? How are you going to solve this? Because this is a major impediment even in an advanced country, society, where in which your interaction between among yourself, among the community, has to be controlled and channelized by the ulama. And particularly what I have seen there is, this masjid group is so totally controlled. Unlike even in India, we have got a different setup. There it is by the ulama setup itself. How do you look at it? How are you going to overcome this kind of problem?
Thank you for the question. So I had a friend telling that the difference between Catholics and the Protestants is that in Catholicism, the priest fire you, but in Protestantism, you fire the priest. Which basically means that in the Catholic Church can excommunicate you, but in Protestantism, you fire the priest and replace him or her with a new one. So in the US and elsewhere, at least the ulama or the local imams, etc., are paid by the community. This is good that they are not paid by a central government. And if they are paid by central government outside of the country, this is a major problem. And if the ulama become more financially independent, they are likely to be intellectually independent too. And there should be an engagement with the community and the imams in a way that we should be able to challenge them. So whenever, for example, I see a sermon or khutbah I find problematic, I approach the imam and tell my criticisms. And if imagine 100 people do that, the imam's ideas will eventually change, because we are all human beings, interaction matter, and especially if the ulama imam are financially dependent on the community, they had to listen to the community. I think, of course, there should be ways of networking, cooperating on education and other grounds, other than imam and mosques. But even in the US, Muslim community can't have an impact on the imam and mosque themselves if they try.
True. I think Mujibur Rahman has been trying to ask a question. Mike, you can go after Mujibur Rahman because he's been trying for some time.
Yes. My question is, can you
Yeah.
describe a little about the movement called Manarist movement led by Muhammad Abdu and Sayyid Rashid in Egypt? Can we
Mujibur
consider
Rahman,
them
can
as
you
reformists?
identify yourself, Mujibur Rahman, please?
Yes, I am Mujibur Rahman from Kerala, India.
Okay.
Yeah, so Muhammad Abduh was a very important Muslim thinker, and unfortunately he didn't leave a well-known major book. There are some collections of his thoughts, and Muhammad Asad, in his message of Quran, repeated some ideas of Muhammad Abduh. And Abduh was a modernist, and his Salafism meant to look at the origin of Islam to produce more modern ideas about science, about rationality, about reason-based interpretations. And unfortunately, his student Rashid Riza brought Abdu's legacy to Wahhabism. And it was a really unfortunate, very dramatic shift. And therefore, by accepting Saudi version of Islam and having connection with Saudi king and too much expectation from the Saudi political power, Rashid Riza really make himself a bridge between Abdu's modernism and then Wahhabi Salafism. In fact, Abdu and Wahhab was totally opposite. Although both defend the idea that we have to look at the origin, the Salafism. The Salafism for Abdu meant to promote reason-based, scientific, modern ideas, and Salafism of Muhammad Abdu is what we have as Wahhabism, as kind of anti-modern reactionary set of ideas. And I think in this I would say Abdul played a positive role and his student Rashid Riza is a negative role.
Absolutely. Mike, you can go ahead, please.
There was a question about what are Muslims doing in America. I just want to share a little incident. Dr. Imam Zia Kawachi, who is a scholar, was an imam at the Richardson, Texas Mosque for about 25 years. See, a group of us did a whole website called Apostasy and Islam, saying that apostasy is not a part of Islam. And our scholar, Dr. Farouk, put the whole history from Prophet Muhammad till this day. So we wanted to get signatures of 100 scholars and 100 imams in the United States to put this thing behind. So I went to Zia Kawachi, Imam Zia Kawachi, who is a good friend of mine, and he looked at it and he agreed, yes, apostasy should not be a part of Islam. Then I asked him, we are looking for 100 signatures. I need your signature. He says, well, Mike, I won't be able to sign right now. Why don't you go to Imam Badawi, who is in Canada, is a major scholar. So I went to Imam Badawi.
Talking
Imam
about Jamal Badawi.
Yes. Imam, he agreed and signed the petition, which is on the website, apostasy and Islam, .blogspot.com. So I went back to Imam Kawachi. Look, Badawi has signed, now it's your turn. He scratched his head and said, look, my congregation, we have some extreme Sunni Palestinians and others who will throw rocks at me. Leave me alone. No. And I argued with him, you are the imam, you should lead them, which you already mentioned, instead of being led by them. what kind of leadership are you following? So I just wanted to share this with my fellow Muslims who
Thanks a
had
lot,
this
Mike.
question.
Thank you, Mike.
Dr. Kuru, every word you are saying resonates with me. And as a Muslim myself, as a writer of the book Islamic American Muslim Agenda, and a lot of reform work we have done, I face everything that you have faced. And I applaud you for this. And Pfizer, one thing we can do is multiply these programs throughout and invite, make an issue to invite our imams. Because as Dr. Ahmet Kuru said, imams have the books already written in their hands. If I say something to them, correct things, they say, no, I don't believe you. I have this book to back me up. So what we need to do, as Dr. Kuru said, we need to create new set of books, correct books, and have a seminar and present them the books to replace the old books that are extremist books. So that is my suggestion. And I really appreciate you, Dr. Kuru. So glad to know you. And we will connect, and inshallah, we'll do a program here in Washington, D.C.
Thank you.
In fact, Mike, I was supposed to come there and you had organized a program. Then coronavirus came in between, so that program was cancelled. So perhaps we can do that still next year, inshallah. Once this COVID-19 is behind us, inshallah, it will be soon. Certainly, we will work on this. We are the other group too, and we will collaborate definitely. And we have lots of things on the anvil, and I'll be talking to you also on that on the phone. We'll be discussing that. And I think I was seeing another person who was trying to ask a question. Was it Irshad or somebody? If he wants to ask a question, please, he can go ahead. I don't see Irshad, perhaps, or maybe anybody else who would like to ask. Yeah, anybody else who would like to ask a question? Okay. So far, okay. So I don't see any question.
Good.
So
look forward to the futuristic things.
Yeah. Also, we have reached 9 p.m. And if there are no other questions, perhaps we can end the program. I mean, I'd like to give another chance. If somebody has not listened to me, maybe if you have a question, please come forward and ask. Or even if you want to make a comment, please do.
We're already running out of time, right?
Yeah. Somebody's there? Who's this?
Charubal.
Raj Charubal. Raj, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Professor, again, one of those brilliant talks, which I'm really getting addicted to these talks. Really brilliant. And just a quick comment. I've in my 20s and 30s, I'm still a big fan of free market, free trade, and so on. But even if you were to debate the economic value of free trade, free enterprise, and so on, one of the things that people like Milton Friedman and all have pointed out is when state controls economy, openness, open discussion, etc., becomes very difficult, practically speaking, because if government has to give you permit for a printing press, who buys a newspaper, who runs a radio station, etc., discussion becomes extremely difficult. And from my limited understanding of various Muslim societies, especially in the Middle East, what I see is that government has controlled economy, hence, and for other reasons also, authoritarian reasons also, they've controlled thought and controlled books, controlled radio, and so on. That is some angle, I think, I would, if I were an advisor, that's one of the advice I would give, that you need to open up your economy so that different intellectuals, different institutions are funded by different people from the left, from the right, up, down, and so on. That brings to an interesting, quick question. World, whether it's Muslim society or not, the discussion is Chinese authoritarian type capitalist model is one available model. Western liberal democratic model is one available model. It'll be very interesting to see what model the Middle Eastern countries, predominantly Muslim countries, pick up. Turkey is somewhere in the crossroad. It's a wonderfully vibrant democratic country. At the same time, you can see authoritarianism creeping here and there. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because this is even African countries, various Asian countries are looking at China as one alternate model.
Yeah.
Where, people have freedom of economics, but state tells you what to read and what not to read. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Definitely, the answer is no. China cannot be a model. because in terms of human rights and democratization, right now, over 1 million Muslim Uyghurs in China have seen not only persecution, but also a kind of genocide. We are hearing and reading in the international media how there is organ selling of Uyghurs, how torture and rape going on. Definitely in terms of human rights, it's getting worse and worse in China. What in my first part of the book, so the book has two parts, present and past. In the present, I argue that there's a connection between democracy, development, and peace. But China, as an authoritarian country and now persecuting Uyghur Muslims at the genocidal level, how can it reach the level of development? There are some explanations. One is the example of Soviet Union. The Soviets reached the very high level of development, surpassed the United States by sending Sputnik, launching Sputnik in the space technology. In Olympiads, etc., it was competing with the United States. But it was a facade, a covering up of the deep problems, and eventually the Soviet economy collapsed. So we'll see whether China take the path of South Korea, Japan, and others, that after certain level of socioeconomic development, you have to democratize. If you don't democratize, if you keep authoritarianism in Hong Kong and others, crush any demand of democracy, your economic development may decline in the long run. That's one thing. The second thing is that what Chinese and other Eastern Asian autocracies achieve more than Muslim majority autocracies is that in this East Asian model, although it is authoritarian, although it is worse than Western model, it's still best than Middle Eastern one. Why? Because, first of all, the Middle East autocracies are military. Turkey now, unfortunately, is an authoritarian country. And look how Erdogan had many military adventures. He sent troops to Syria. He sent troops to Libya. He is ready to fight on many fields in order to cover up his atrocities at home and authoritarianism problem. And he has a military mindset. The Baas regime in Syria, in Iraq were like that. The military generals in Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia, the police force and others, it's a very military mindset. Because of the oil-based rentier economy, there is no economic interdependence in the Middle East. There is a military adventure. This is not the case in East Asia. They have an export-based economy, which eventually led technological development. They are authoritarian, but less militaristic, more economy-based. The second thing is religious dogma, ulama, they don't have it. They are more secular and focusing more secular education. And we have some high school, secondary school student tests in PISA. And according to PISA test scores, the East Asian countries, authoritarian or democratic, always have the top scores. And Muslim countries have the lowest scores. It shows how East Asia, despite being authoritarian, focus on education, invest in education in a scientific way. Whereas in the Middle East, as I gave the example of Turkey, education too much politicized, ideological, the Islamization through madrasas and others really became a priority for certain people. That's the education problem. And then related to these two factors, the rentier economy in the Middle East autocracies made things economically weaker, whereas in East Asia, with its more investment in education, investment, science, having less military focus, more productivity and export oriented, they achieve some level of socioeconomic development. But I think the path for China and other East authoritarian ones is to choose either becoming more open society and keep developing, or closed society, more authoritarian, and it may follow the path of the Soviet Union in terms of a multi-layer collapse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Ahmed, in your book, you established a connection between ideas and material conditions. So now from what you just say, we need to tweak that a bit and say that material condition that result from a democratic system, not from an authoritarian system, because even an authoritarian system can be rich and materially rich. And the connection that you tried to establish in your book between ideas and material conditions.
I
How
totally agree with you. Yeah, they have at least interrelated. I myself give the priority to ideas because in the long run they have an impact. And we'll see in the long run how certain authoritarian ideas may have negative impacts in China and elsewhere. You're right.
I understand. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of this discussion. In fact, we have gone beyond 2 hours. We started around 6:50 India time. Now it's 9:05. So we have gone beyond 2 hours. We have spent 2 hours and 15 minutes. Ahmed, thanks a lot. It's been a fascinating discussion, and you have given a lot of food for thought for the Muslims who had participated in this, and also for the non-Muslims. They have got a peek into the liberal Muslim mindset and what we are trying to do, to change the Muslim mindset or Muslim attitude towards society and also towards democracy and any sort of anachronism that results from a nexus between the ulama and anybody else, not just the state. So therefore, I think, as I told you on the phone yesterday, this is just the first of our meetings, and I'm planning more such meetings, inshallah, where we will have more of, we'll bring in more people from across the globe, have a panel discussion, perhaps one discussion on apostasy or one discussion on maybe the whole idea of reason and revelation. Do we have to privilege revelation or reason and rationality? Or we could have lots of things in mind. Mike too has some ideas. So therefore, in collaboration with so many other friends in India and of course abroad, we would like to go ahead and do more things as think in the future, and we have you in our mind always, and I'm sure you will join us again in the future discussions. And thanks a lot, Ahmed, once again for your time.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
I can't hold you for long because you mustn't have had your breakfast yet. So please.
Yes, Faisal, I'm very thankful to you, to Islamic Forum for Moderate Thought, and all the participants. And although I didn't have breakfast, you give questions and conversations enough food of thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ahmed. Pleasure. In fact, Mike, who had another meeting, canceled it and stayed on here. That was the level of interest your talk has generated. Thanks so much.
Exactly. I canceled the other meeting.
Yes. Take care, Ahmed. And I'll be in touch with you on the phone. Thanks a lot. Please go ahead. Good luck and salams to you.
Salam to you. Bye-bye.
It was a fascinating discussion.
Thank you.
Dear friends, I think it's time we bring this discussion to a close now.